So I did not really have giving a sermon dressed as a cat on my 2025 bingo, but that's okay. So anyone who was born and raised in the South knows that there is no better time or place to stir the pot a little than church on a Sunday morning. So I'm going to start by saying something that might sound a little strange. Horror is a very Unitarian Universalist genre. And that sounds a little unlikely. We're not really a hellfire and damnation folk. We don't preach eternal punishment or use fear as a tool for control. But at its heart, horror is not about punishment. It's about recognition. It's about what happens when we finally look at the thing we've been trying really hard not to see. At its very best, horror is a practice of spiritual honesty. Horror doesn't lie about the darkness or pretend everything's fine when it's not. You can't just sell the haunted house and move, or call your parents from summer camp and say, guys, the whole slasher thing's getting kind of out of hand, just please come get me. Horror tells us that the only way out is through, that we can't just look the other way when bad things happen and hope it'll just stop. Horror asks some of the very same questions that our faith asks. What happens when we refuse to face what's broken in us or in our society? What happens when we won't acknowledge the crimes of our ancestors? What do we owe one another when the fear takes hold? And how do we keep moving forward in a world that keeps giving us all these reasons to be afraid? But more than all that, I think horror can teach us a lot because the engine of horror is not fear or violence, it's empathy. If we didn't care about the people on the screen or on the page, if we didn't see ourselves in them, if we didn't feel their fear, their grief, their desperate hope, horror would not work. It moves us precisely because we feel it, right? Because we recognize ourselves in the trembling hand or the cry for help or the scream in the dark. Even the monsters are more often than not born from empathy. They're mirrors of pain, loneliness, anger, shame, all those parts of us that we try to hide and look away from. But monsters don't just appear out of nowhere, right? They're created, sometimes deliberately. Certain institutions thrive on keeping us afraid of each other. Political systems, media empires, social media platforms, they all know that fear is profitable, and fear keeps us divided, right? Because if we can't work together to solve the problems when we're afraid of each other. One of the easiest ways to keep people afraid is to convince them that somebody else, right, the people on the other side, those are the monsters. You know, maybe those people are indoctrinating our children into unnatural lifestyles. Or maybe the people on the other side are all Nazis. Our faith calls us to resist that. Our principles remind us that every person has inherent worth and dignity, even when they vote differently, even when their choices frighten or anger us or hurt us. And that doesn't mean we accept injustice or stay silent. It means we refuse to surrender our compassion to the machinery of fear. So when we talk about monsters, we're kind of talking about two things, right? We're talking about the outer monsters, the external ones, the people or the groups that we're taught to fear or avoid or dismiss or dehumanize. But we're also talking about the inner monsters, you know, all that fear and hurt and grief and trauma that we carry inside us. But here's the truth. Those are not two different things at all. The monsters that we fear in the world are often reflections of the monsters we fear in ourselves. When we can't sit with our own sorrow, we punish it in others. When we can't face our own shame, we call somebody else the problem. When our inner monsters go untended, they start to look for somewhere else to land. They might land on our neighbors, sometimes our family members, sometimes an entire group of people that we're told are dangerous or wrong. And when we can't address what is unresolved within us, we start to see monsters everywhere. There's a movie called The Babadook, and if you haven't seen the movie yet, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to spoil it for you. You had 11 years to watch it, so. It's basically a UU sermon, but scary and disturbing. It's about a mother named Amelia and her 6-year-old son, Samuel. And they're being terrorized by a monster from a kid's pop-up book. We have a slide. It's the worst pop-up book ever. Okay. Amelia's husband was killed in a car accident, driving her to the hospital to deliver Samuel. And she's never dealt with her grief or really processed it at all. She's so incapacitated by it almost 6 years later that she just can't be a good mom to Sam. He's not getting anything he needs. He's acting out. It's a terrible situation. Even before the monster shows up, they're just not okay. And then the monster happens, right? And at first, it comes in this book, and she tries to get rid of it. That's her first instinct, and it's a pretty good instinct, right? Get rid of it. She destroys it, but it just comes right back, and it's even worse now. Like the second version of it after she's torn it up is even worse than the first version. The more she resists, the stronger it becomes. It says right there in the book, which they actually made the book to go along with the movie. The more you deny me, the stronger I get. And terrible things happen. It's a pretty frightening movie, but finally it does something that it's not really clear why it does it, but it shows her a vision of her husband's death. And it's not a pretty thing to see at all. But finally, she sees it, she confronts it, and now she can stand up to the Babadook, right? But she doesn't kill it. You know, she does a very UU kind of thing. She tells it off and she sends it to the basement, right? Put the welcome mat out with a room of my own, except that I'm here, and from you I've grown. Keep me smaller in size, I might leave you alone. We see her again later, and it's still down there in the basement. But now she's feeding it, and she's caring for it, and she's making a space for it. It's still a monster, it still bows up on her sometimes and gets scary and horrifying, but when that happens, she stands her ground, and she just whispers to it. She just says, shh, it's okay, it's okay. She feeds it nice little bowls of worms that she and her son dig up out of the garden. But she tells it that everything's gonna be okay, and it's just part of her life now. It's an embodiment of her grief and her fear and maybe some of her mental health struggles that she's had over the years. And she's learned that you don't banish these things, right? You just tend them. And that's what compassion looks like in the dark. And it's not just the Babadook. There's a whole subset of monster movies that lift up some of our UU values. If you want a viewing list, come find me, I'll hook you up with one. But all these stories remind us healing isn't about banishing the dark. It's about learning to live with it tenderly, with awareness, accountability, and care. Now, we're living in a moment when cruelty is often rewarded with power, when empathy is mistaken for weakness, and when fear is used as a political strategy. And it's tempting to give up. It's to meet cynicism with cynicism and to close our hearts for protection. But our faith calls us to do something that's so much harder, to keep choosing compassion even when the world doesn't. Feeding our monster doesn't mean approving of what it does. It means acknowledging that hate, fear, and division don't disappear when we close our eyes. They quiet down only when we face them, name them, and feed them something better. Things like courage, truth, and empathy. So what does that look like for us beyond all the movies and the metaphors? How do we practice the care and feeding of monsters? Well, we can start with our own monsters. When fear or anger or shame show up inside us, let's not banish it. Let's feed it gentleness. Ask, what is this feeling trying to protect? What's it trying to tell us? Name it, tend it, give it something better to eat. When another person's fear shows up as cruelty or defensiveness, we can try to meet it with curiosity instead of contempt. Why do they think that? Why do they feel that way? And remember, you don't have to accept harm or hate to choose compassion. Boundaries are part of the care and feeding of monsters, too. We can refuse the feast of outrage. The world is full of systems that profit from our fear and division. Every time we take a breath before we repost or react or judge, we're starving that system. What if we feed it hope and compassion instead? We can tell new stories. Horror reminds us that fear turns to power when we name it out loud. Use your voice, whether it's in art or activism or just in conversation. Use it to shine a light on the shadows that we all share. Finally, we can just stay in community. Splitting up in a horror movie is a classic rookie mistake, right? Monsters lose power when we face them together. So just keep showing up to the church, to your neighborhood, to the messy, miraculous work of just being human. So maybe this Halloween, when the ghosts and goblins come knocking, let's remember that the line between fear and compassion is really not as wide as it seems. Maybe the monsters in our stories and the ones in our hearts are not asking to be slain, just to be seen. I think it's appropriate to close today's message with a few words from our Lord and Savior, Stephen King. He says, "Horror stories are best appreciated by those who are compassionate and empathetic, a paradox, but a true one. I believe it is the unimaginative among us, those incapable of appreciating the dark side of make-believe, who have been responsible for most of the world's woes. In stories of the supernatural and paranormal, I have tried especially hard to show the real world as it is and to tell the truth about the America I know and love. Some of those truths are ugly, but as the poem says, scars become beauty marks when there is love." May it be so, and happy Halloween.